So today we are introducing you to THINC's first podcast. And today I have a little bit of a surprise, which I've never done on any of our video blogs, is I have a guest coming, but I'll talk to you about the guest in a little bit. So today's podcast is really not about THINC, it's not about me. It's a little bit about how communication is really, in my view, the passport to how your life can pan out. And to tell you a little bit about communication, I'm going to give you some examples, some real life examples from my life and how I improved my communication. I mean, I obviously wasn't born like this to be able to talk to you, endlessly. And, I go on for hours and sometimes people are like, stop talking. But let me start at the very beginning. When I was a kid, I loved to perform. And, when I was 2, 3, 4, 5, I used to hold these shows in my house where I used to sell tickets to everybody, who lived in our community and force them to come. Otherwise, I would cry for hours if they didn't come. And I would basically have these little shows where I would be doing a preface of my favorite author. So to cut a long story short, I spent a lot of my childhood working in, theater, in TV shows in different languages. Languages sometimes I didn't know, and I had to transcribe them in English or I had to transcribe them in Hindi, and I had to be able to speak those languages. As I said to you, I don't think communication is something that you are born with. You might have an aptitude towards it, or you might not have an aptitude towards it, but it's something you can definitely build and grow. When I was 16, I was chosen to be an exchange student to go to Canada on the Rotary exchange program. And it was a huge culture shock. I came from a very different, very busy city. I was thrown in deep end in a sort of a farming and a dairying community where the people were very welcoming, but they never really had an Indian exchange student, and they didn't really understand anything about the country. And sort of as the adage goes, they've thought that we grew up with horses and elephants and cows and things like that on the street. So what I'd done is I had built like a carousel deck of slides about my home, about my family, about the city, about how we dressed, my previous school and everything. Every time I would end up in a Rotary meeting or I would end up in a school meeting where they would just look at me as this sort of strange Indian exchange student, I would pull out my deck, literally my carousel and my deck, and I would show them pictures of my home and things like that. And I felt like pictures were a great way of communicating as well, because whatever I said, because I was so far away, I was thousands and thousands of miles away, and many of them had never even visited my country. Many didn't even know where it was on the map, so I even had a map to show them exactly where I lived and where I was from. That it really helped. The picture painted like a whole life, a story that I would have never been able to communicate. I got back from Canada. My mother said to me again that you're not doing enough. Being a real ambassadoress of my country whilst I was in Canada, I decided to volunteer for a youth festival. This youth festival was called Malhar. It's a very famous youth festival and it's still ongoing. So my job was really trying to get 17-year-olds, 18-year-olds, and 19-year-olds who felt they were hugely talented and immensely important to actually participate in this youth festival. So I had another gentleman with me, another kid who now is super famous, so I won't name him. When I say my communication style had already developed as an 18, 19-year-old, there was this boy who had this immense ability to build humor into his communication. I also learned that one of the other ways of communicating effectively is to be fairly humorous and to add to lighten the load or lighten the room. Honest to God, that's also helped me as a lawyer. My mother again said to me that I think that you've taken acting and you've done all of this to a certain extent. You kind of made a backup plan. She had a law background. I said, oh yeah, law, because that's sort of like acting, isn't it? Obviously, law school was extremely humbling, because nobody gives you a script. We have this thing in law school called moot court. It's super enjoyable. It's super daunting for anybody who can't speak. It's even somebody who can speak, which I thought I was really good at, right? So you go into moot court where you're given a situation and a case. So you're sitting in front of the entire law school. You've got the judges who are sitting judges there. You've got my reputation because obviously, my mother and my grandfather, etc., were lawyers, and everyone is like, oh yeah, she thinks, she's amazing. So let's just see how this goes. And you realize that your preparation is super, super important. Those people who aren't prepared, and I've fallen in that loop many times in moot court situations where I felt I was prepared, but maybe I took a few shortcuts. I was so stressed about the case histories that I was already talking about that I didn't go any deeper. And then the question that the judge picks up, or the issue that the moderator judge comes and asks me, is something that I haven't prepared. You don't understand the pressure of that. It's not like a situation on stage where you forget your lines and you have a teleprompter, you have somebody from the, in the wings actually shouting your lines at you. This is a situation where you freeze up and you freeze to death. You actually want the ground to open up and you want to die. And I've been in that situation. So the other thing I would say is, to be a good communicator, need to prepare. I always look like, and I think a lot of my colleagues at THINC, we always look like we've been very nonchalant about things. But behind the scenes, we've tried to look at every fact. We've tried to research every person in the room. We save client time, we save client negotiation, grief, as I call it, because as I said to you, it's sort of like a moot court situation, right? When you have an adversary and you have two parties on different sides of the table, what you want to do is you want the best outcome, but you want the best outcome for yourself. What we always forget, communication is a two-way street, which means that if you want the best outcome for yourself, the other party wants the best outcome for themselves. And if they want the best outcome for themselves and they're going to constantly keep fighting against you for that, you're never going to be in a position where you have a good outcome. What I would say is, to have a really good outcome in any situation or any negotiation or any deal, is you need to be a communicator who understands giving and getting. So you will never get everything. It's like a relationship, right? Like last time I asked any husband or wife, it isn't a one-way street. If one person is the one getting and the one person is always giving, there is going to be a breakdown of the relationship. It's the same thing in a communication situation. So there is definitely going to be a situation where you are not going to be able to move forward if you end up in a situation where you think you're communicating, but all you're doing is trying to get, not give. I'll give you an example. When we do share, sale, and purchase agreements, we have a list of warranties under those agreements. Those warranties are basically the seller telling the buyer that I'm warranting to you that all of these things in the company are okay. Now, there are a couple of fundamental warranties. Those are obviously title. So obviously, if I'm selling a company and you're buying my company, you need to know for a fact that I own the shares of my company and that I am giving you my shares. Their shares are not dummy shares, fake shares, or shares owned by someone else who I'm fronting. So those are called fundamental warranties. But there are a whole bunch of other warranties in share, sale, and purchase agreements that are, for example, the fact that the company has paid all its taxes, the fact that, there are no environmental issues if you're a factory or a warehouse, and underneath your warehouse, if you have products that are either pollutant or oil and gas or restricted products, that you're not contaminating the water table. Then there could be other things where you don't have any employment issues ongoing, you don't have any cases, you don't have any litigation cases ongoing and things like that. So all these factors are put into warranties. And then what typically happens is, like, for example, I had a deal in Africa where we ended up in a situation where the logistics and warehouse company that we were buying had some tax issues in Africa. So along with the warranties, which says we have no tax issues in any part of the world where we do business, they did have tax issues in Africa, and they were waiting for adjudication from the tax authorities in a few East African countries. So for that, we have what we call indemnities. The indemnities are statements in an agreement, a share, sale, and purchase agreement, which basically say that I indemnify you should the government of, say, Tanzania come after you in respect of the tax liability that was created in my company at that time when you bought it. So I'm indemnifying you for a very finite and specific issue. Now, as lawyers, we tend to have a huge debate on indemnities. Sometimes it's a little bit of a legal debate where you have to give in as a seller, because otherwise the buyer is just not going to take that risk. You have to mitigate the risk for the buyer, and that risk is quantifiable. Sometimes, like of course in the tax case in Tanzania, we didn't know how quantifiable it would be, but whatever the case may be. So you have to know that that is something you're going to have to give. Now, if you constantly spend 3 days battling over an indemnity that you have to give, otherwise the buyer is not going to buy the company and is going to be a dead dark deal or what we call a deal breaker, then there is no point in trying to hold on to your ego and carry on a communication for 3 days, wasting everybody's time and money. And that's sometimes why lawyers also get a bit of a bad name. I'll do a whole other podcast on lawyers, how to hire the right one and how to fire the right one. But I would end up in a situation where I would be the one who's sort of like the peacemaker in the negotiation, because sometimes you, as I said, you have to give to get, and if you want to get, you have to give. And that's just how life works, and that's just how communication works. The last example that I'm going to take is personal relationships. I would say number one is you need to listen and validate each other's feelings. To summarize, there is verbal communication where you have your tone, you have your pace, your clarity of communication. You have non-verbal communication, which is your body language, which could be eye contact, which could be posture, stance, me turning away from you, etc. And then you have written communication, where you have structure of sentences, where you have brevity, where you have a style, where you're able to actually be impactful as I talk to you, like the TED Talk people who are very impactful. Now, let me talk to you about my brilliant guest today on my podcast. So I want to introduce a golfing legend. His name is Shiv Kapur. And when I decided to do a communication podcast as Think Tank's first podcast, the whole team at THINC said, hey, I think you should invite Shiv to be a guest on your podcast because you talk too much and I'm sure everybody won't want to just hear you. Now, the reason they say this is because Shiv Kapur is a great communicator, and you'll see this for yourself in the questions I will ask him. He is, very well known in India because he was one of the first golfers. He was in college playing golf in Purdue, then he became a professional golfer. His wins include the Volvo Masters of Asia. He's a gold medalist in the Asian Games. He plays on the Asian Tour. He is known immensely for being calm under pressure and humor like crazy. He finds the funny side of everything, and he basically bullies everybody, like in a good way. So he won't ever like take your seriousness at heart, and he's always very strategic in his mindset, but he's very focused and grounded. So I want to introduce you to Shiv and ask him some trick questions so that you get a little bit of a different perspective. Now, the reason I've also chosen a golfer is not only for the reason that he's great, but number one, it's a game I'm obsessed with and I play a lot, and I've told you about this. And the team also wants me to do a different podcast on how golf affects business and real life, and I'll do that in a more detailed way. But the second thing is, I think everything from golf and the way people play demonstrates their actual personality and their communication style. So if I play with a client and the way the client relates to me, plays his game, acts during a 4-hour round of golf, gives me a very good and clear idea of his communication style. Is he aggressive? Is he egotistical? Is he kind? Is he compassionate? Is he fair? Honestly, I'll be able to tell you all of that after 9 holes of golf, not even 4 hours. After 2 hours of a golf game with you, I'll be able to tell you that. So let's hear it from Shiv's perspective and let's see what you think. Thank you so much for coming. This is our first Think Tank podcast, and I thought you would be an amazing guest on it because we're talking about communication, and I know how great of a communicator you are. So I wanted you to just tell me a little bit about your journey as a golfer, going to school in America, being thrown from the deep end, from India to the US. I talked about it myself because I was 16 and I went on a Rotary exchange program, and I took a carousel of photos of the fact that I didn't ride on elephants and I didn't have monkeys in my back garden, and we did have horses and cow. We did have cows on the street a bit, but you know what I mean. So tell me a little bit about your journey and then we can build on that.
Firstly, thanks for having me. It's great to be here. I think the things you touched upon, if I look back, even if I go before college, right, I think travel is probably one of the best ways to learn how to communicate, because not just for the simple reason that there's different languages, different cultures. For example, when I went to Japan when I was 12 years old, you were told, you make sure you bow to your elders. There's certain things that considered good in certain cultures and not in others. Then you go to America and it's the opposite end of the spectrum, or you go to Australia where everyone's mate, right? You can talk to the Prime Minister of the country and it's mate. And we grew up in India and it's uncle and auntie, and everyone says, why do you say uncle, auntie, So a lot of the communication is also quite cultural, I feel. And the more you travel and the more you experience, you learn all these little nuances of how to speak to people from different countries. And I think Dubai is a great example of that, right? We're a melting pot of so many different cultures, and I think it teaches you a lot. I think kids that grow up and are educated in this multicultural environment learn a lot. And my experience personally of studying in America in college, you're absolutely right, You used to say, oh, do you guys still ride on camels? And do you sit on horses? And there's two ways you can react to that, right? You can feel offended, or you can make light of the situation. There's a very famous golfer actually on the European tour, and he used to, every time I used to come onto the driving range, he used to say, where did you park your elephant, right? And today we're in a very sensitive world where people, treat it as racial undertones or whatever, but it was literally him, I look at it as the Indian Maharajas used to sit on elephants, so I sit, on the top of an elephant. So I think perspective is also things, and how you deal with the situation, if you get defensive about it, or you explain yourself. And I think when you talk about being a good communicator, I think the first thing to being a good communicator is having the other person on your side, right? Make friends with the person. Whether it's in a business setting, if the person's your friend, he's more likely to do business with you. If the person likes you, they're more likely to be more receptive to what you're saying. So I think likability is a big part of communication. If my first impression of somebody is not good, I'm not really listening to what they're saying. It's going in from one ear and out of the other ear. So I think that's the first part.
Isn't that quite a tough one? Because suppose I'm put in a situation like your golf team. Let's talk about you being at Purdue and being in a golf team. Were you the only Indian golfer on the team? What happens if you end up in a situation where you don't like someone on the golf team? They're either sort of like slightly bullying you, or they're never giving you that sort of freedom. How do you change the fact that you actually don't like them? You have to communicate with them because they're on your team, and you need to change your mindset. How did you face that, or did you have to deal with that?
I think in any competitive environment, there's always bound to be competitive jealousies, envy, and they're not going to love you, right? You're competing for the same spot on a team. You learn to be friends, and you learn to find effective ways, but if you're more likable, it's much easier. Let's just put it that way. You don't try and be the smartest guy in the room every time. I think a lot of people, the mistake they make is you want to impress upon others that, I'm the smartest guy in the room, or I'm better than you. I think humility plays a big part in communication as well. In my younger days, my nickname at Delhi Golf Club was Cocky, right? Because I was like
Not so humble.
Not so humble, right? I was this little kid who, because I was always competing with kids much older than me. So you want to be able to hang with them, and you've got to be, I think, inwardly cocky. But at that stage, I hadn't learned the difference between inwardly cocky and outwardly cocky. And I would just, there was no filter between words and, with thoughts and words, so to speak. So I think learning that over time, learning how to communicate, you've got to be inwardly confident, and, a stronger word for that being cocky. But you don't want to exude that on others. But being likable, I think, is the biggest premise of, and you can't make people like you, but you can be more friendly. You can always be the person that's willing to listen, right? I think listening is as important a part of communication as, speaking is. And I think my wife would completely disagree, right? That would say, you're not a very good listener, but I think most parts is, you want to listen as much as you speak. You can be a great orator, but you may not be a good listener.
But tell me a little bit about sort of the life cycle of the golf psyche and the game. So, for example, communication with your caddy. Because you see in the news, people have caddies for a really long time, like Phil Mickelson and Bones. And then obviously Bones now has his own blog and everything. But how does that communication work? Tell me about caddies, tell me about sponsors, and then tell me about the other ecosystem that an athlete like you has around them, and what's the difference?
Yeah, so even though we're an individual sport, golf being an individual sport, you always have a very large ecosystem around you. But your only ally on the field is your caddy, right? It's you against another 156 players in the field. So the only ally you have is your caddy, and your caddy for those 5 hours is your best friend, your confidant, your teammate. And it's not till very recently that they've started recognizing caddies at the prize giving. Now the caddies get invited for the trophy ceremony, and it just tells you what an important aspect of the whole ecosystem that is. And I think, especially under pressure situations, right? When you talk about what is pressure, really? I mean, if we talk about the word pressure, which is used so much, whether it's in golf or business or whatever, pressure is simply the fear of failure, right? And the minute you can cross that hurdle and say, oh, don't you feel the pressure? You've got the final round coming. Yeah, it's pressure, but it's more, I would say that's more expectation than pressure. Pressure is the fear of failing. The minute that goes out of the window, all your pressure is gone. The way to communicate in a pressure situation is to actually just make light of the situation. You've got to bring humor into it. You've got to joke. You've got to go, like, how often is it that you and I would play together and we're laughing on the golf course and you'd end up making a birdie or I'd end up making a birdie. But you play the same hole in a tournament setting and everything's tight and everything's tense and your caddy's telling you, you're afraid to make a mistake. That's what it is. Whereas when we're playing a friendly round, we're not. So at that stage, communicating with him is about, the caddy's role is to keep me relaxed, right? Whether it's cracking a joke, whether it's, reminding me of, something that happened 6 months ago in the same situation. A very good sort of story around this, and this is not actually my caddy, but this was Dr. Bob Rotella, one of the most famous sports psychologists there is. Rory recently won the Masters after working with him. Mm-hmm. Jack Nicklaus, even LeBron James, Michael Jordan, all worked with him. And I was lucky enough to spend time with him at 2 US Opens. And my best finish came in Pinehurst and in 2014. And I was walking up to the first tee in the final round. He said some PG-rated stuff to me as well. But the whole crux of the message was to get me in a relaxed frame of mind. As I was walking, we go through a tunnel from the putting green onto the first tee where there's this massive crowd. The group in front of me is Rory McIlroy and Adam Scott, and I'm, in contention, top 10 in a US Open. So that's all you're thinking about, this is the final round. And he made me think of something completely different, right? And he said, on the lines of, if you're going to be with a beautiful woman tonight, this is how you're going to talk to her. You're going to be kind to her. You're going to tell her how beautiful she's looking, how great her lipstick is. You're not going to say your lipstick's all bad, and stuff like that. So I walk on the first tee with a massive smile on my face, and I tell my caddy's like, "What are you laughing about?" I was like, "I'll tell you later. Let me hit the shot." Now I've hit arguably one of the most important shots of my career, the first, the opening drive of the final round of the US Open. And I felt like I was out there with my buddies. So he did a great job of getting me in that relaxed frame of mind and all kind of taking you to a more familiar place rather than getting overawed by the situation. Mm-hmm. I think that's also a very big role of the caddy, is to, that's your familiarity. That's the person you see on a daily basis. So whether it's the first round of the tournament or the final hole, you need to have those sort of processes in place where he can kind of keep you relaxed in the right.
But were you always this funny, like in your dealings? Because I know every time I deal with you, all I do is laugh. And then, like you said, I forget what I'm doing. I'm actually just doing that for fun, but I'm hanging out. It's almost like a hangout feeling. So were you always this funny, or did you build on it? Or is that part of your sort of your likability project, if I can call it that?
I don't know about any of those. I think my humor is sometimes not taken so well. I don't consider myself necessarily a funny guy, but I just think you've got to use humor in your life. I think we take ourselves way too seriously, right? I think you're not doing yourselves any favor if you're like, I have to. And I could do a better job of it as well, right? I think when it comes to golf, sometimes I'm a bit too hard on myself. Mm-hmm. And as I've gotten older, I'm learning to get, that's what experience is, in a way that, there is life beyond golf. And it's not just golf, right? It's beyond business. And my sort of tipping point, or something that has always resonated with me, was Sadhguru. And I played a round of golf with him, and I sat with him in the cart, and I asked him a few questions. And the one thing that always stuck with me, what he said, is you can't control outcomes. The problem in our lives is most of us are trying to control outcomes, whether it be on the golf course, whether it be with friendships, relationships. You can't make somebody like you. You can't control what's going to happen to that golf shot. You can't make sure your business is profitable. All you can control is the process. And it's as simple as that. If we approached our whole life with that philosophy of, I can be nice to you, whether you like me back or not, I don't know. I can put my best foot forward on the golf course. I can't control the results. Same thing with, So I think that is something we get very result-oriented and not so much process-oriented. And if you go back to, if I'm being spiritual, the Bhagavad Gita, which is karm karo phal ki iksha na karo, right? And I think that is really the crux of life, is that you control the effort you put in, you don't actually control outcomes.
No, that's incredible. That's a lot of thinking.
I don't know how I took it from humor to that.
No, I know. But it's all connected, right? It's who you are and being true to yourself. So that's what I was also saying, is that when I communicate, I have to listen to communicate better. And then I need to be true to myself. I can't be someone I'm not if I really want to get the best outcome of the communication, whether it's with my client, whether it's in a mediation, or whatever the situation might be. And what about difficult things like sponsorships? Because again, like if you're in a team and then you're growing to be a professional golfer, I'm sure many people were vying for the same type of sponsorships. And how does that really work?
Yeah, I think, look, sponsorships are part of it. The biggest part of it is your performance, right? But then there's another part of it, which is your personality and what you give back. And I always tell the younger players, I was like, you can't think that the brand needs you or the company needs you. You've got to see how you can be a value add for them. And I think that's how you approach it, right? If I'm doing a corporate day for one of the brands that I'm endorsed by, I'm trying to make sure that every client that comes on that day is having the best experience of his life. Everything has to be a win-win situation. I am not entitled where, Callaway needs to sponsor me. They're going to sell a lot more golf clubs if Shiv Kapur is wearing a Callaway cap. It's not how it works.
Right.
There's a performance aspect, which is, you're seen on TV, the young kids see you, whether it's Marriott Bonvoy today for me or, Hero Motocorp or whatever it may be. You want to be the right ambassador for them. And you have to approach it in a way that, you need them more than they need you. And anytime you have that attitude, I think you'll always put your best forward. And I think that's something I've been lucky enough that most of my sponsors have been long-term sponsors and they've stuck through me through my career. And I feel like I want to give value to them, give value to their clients, to their customers, whatever the case may be, that when they come out and I'm on that day with them, that, it's one of them.
Yeah, it's something memorable that you remember that Shiv was there, the brand was there, and it's all kind of together and it seemed like...
And the measure of that is that when you start getting associated with that brand, when people say, Marriott Bonvoy, oh, by the way, Shiv is a ambassador of them, or you mentioned, and that's when you've done your part, right? If the association of you is with the brand, and I think it also works the other way with the brand. If you don't invest in the player over a long period of time, you don't build those associations. And I think IPL just finished, right? If you see Virat Kohli, 18 years with the same franchise, he's synonymous with RCB. MS Dhoni with Chennai Super Kings, or Rohit Sharma but if a player is bouncing around from team to team or sponsor to sponsor, if I mentioned a famous cricketer to you, which brand comes to mind? I think if you endorse way too many brands also, there's no brand recall.
Yeah.
So I think that's where also the placement of it is very important.
So it's also about loyalty then, right? It's about building that loyalty and building that franchise within your...
Yeah, and you will have ups and downs in your career, right? So I think there are certain brands that are stuck with their players, through thick and thin. And, Ping is one of those companies that I find that is like a lifelong partner, whether you look at a Lee Westwood or a Miguel Angel Jimenez. They keep people for a long period of time. So that today when I'm telling you, those are the names that come to mind.
Right.
But some of the other...
associated with face 100%.
Right. Like Tiger was Nike for the longest time. It was always Tiger Woods and Nike. They were synonymous with each other. Michael Jordan and, Nike as well. So those associations take time, but also that's the mark of, that if you can associate an athlete with the brand, then you know that both have done their job.
Right. I know you mentor a lot of young players. I watched you in India fooling around and, making jokes with a lot of the younger players, some of whom were not performing well, some of whom perhaps don't have the mindset to perform and win. What would you say the difference between your communication style, now being a slightly more senior player, is to the younger crop coming up? And do you think it's a good difference or a bad difference?
So I think it's hard to sort of measure two different eras. I would say I'm still part of this era, but the game of golf has changed, the way kids are today have changed and thinking, and I do mentor a few of them. In fact, I wake up in the morning, as one of the young kids who's in America, he texts me, I would say almost weekly, and at 5 a.m. I'm responding to him, and there's other kids in India, and I enjoy that. I think I've reached that stage, more than 2 decades into my career. Now it's time to also give back a little bit, and I'm happy to share that knowledge with them, my learning of playing all over the world. But I think they approach it very differently. I think also the world has changed, right? We did everything very slow paced. And I went to Europe, you went over for 3 months and you played, 10 tournaments. Everything is fast. Today, what you consume digitally, everyone's watching shorts. Mm-hmm. How many people actually sit and watch it'll be a good test. I'll be curious. How many people are going to watch the podcast or they're going to watch the 2-minute snippet? So the young boy is also looking for that quick win. They're looking for quick results. And I told them it's a process and you've got to, be in it for the long haul. Success doesn't come overnight. What people don't realize with athletes is they'll see one Olympics, but it takes 20 years to get to that Olympics. The preparation, right? So but the great thing with golf, and I tell them this all the time, is that 1 week can change your life. You can have 20 bad weeks and you have that one win and it'll change your life forever, right? Yeah. So you got to keep grinding and keep getting ready and be prepared for that one great sort of high that you're going to have. Mm-hmm. And the thing with golf is even the best player in the world wins 5% of the time. So 95% of the time you're losing. So you've got to learn to be a good loser before you can learn to be a winner. And learn from I've had so much learning more from my losses than my wins. Right? When you win, you're almost like in a zone, you're numb, you don't know. People say, oh, what were you thinking? Yeah. And I'm almost like, I wasn't thinking, right? Yeah. But when I lost or I've come very close to winning, I was very aware of what mistake I made, that I won't repeat that in the past. So I think that's also something that I always tell them, don't be in a hurry. Mm-hmm. Success doesn't come overnight, but you've got to build the slow steps, and it's got to be about being 1% better tomorrow than you were today. Mm-hmm. And it's those small victories that whether you're doing a practice drill, were you better at it today than you were yesterday?
Right.
And will you be better 1 week from now? Yeah. So that's how you measure your...
Like the small benchmarks that lead to ultimate success. Yeah. Was there a point in your life or a situation where you felt if you had communicated better, you would have been in a different place or it would have helped you? Tell me about a situation maybe where you felt this is where I could have been better.
Look, I think hindsight is a wonderful thing, right? And we can always look back and say, oh, if I'd done this or if I'd done that. But I'm not one who really looks in the rearview mirror too much. I think a lot of the experiences that came along the way shaped who I am today. I wouldn't trade in any of the experiences I had for, obviously there's always regret. I wish I'd won this tournament. Or if at that stage I'd said this to my caddy, or if my caddy had said this to me. Yeah. So there's always going to be those elements. But I think overall, the only way to succeed is to not look back and look forward. The only time you look back is to look back to see what could I have done differently, right? And yes, could I have communicated better? 100%. There's many, whether it's relationships, whether it's golf, whether it's business. If I'd said that, maybe he would have taken it differently. Or if I had said this to my caddy, maybe I wouldn't have chosen that club or that line or whatever it may be. But I think you can't dwell too much on the past, right? I think you've got to just keep moving on. And that is the ultimate sort of difference between good and great, right?
Yeah, because you can change, like you said, likability. So my communication style may have affected or somebody negatively, but in the future, I can change my style because I know how that person's reacting. But one of the things I also said is that golf taught me how to deal with people, because people can be very temperamental in the golf situation. When they get mad, they throw clubs, they get mad at you for their bad shot, they blame you. And then on the other hand, there are some people who are super chill and they're super kind and they're very courteous. And so my question really to you is, if you had to give one piece of advice to a young golfer coming up, or me, for example, a young professional, older professional trying to be a good golfer or whatever, what would you say I needed to do better? Or what would you say is the one thing that stood out for you that can actually shape the way you are, either in terms of likability or better communication?
So coming back to your first point, right, which is on the golf course, people behave in very weird ways. And I'm guilty of it as well, right? Because I think under competition circumstances, I'm a very different person. I think it brings out a different side of you, whereas recreational golf. But when you play a round of golf with someone, you can tell everything you need to know about them. If I play a round of golf with somebody, I know if I want to be in business with them or not. I can tell if I want to be their friend or not. Losing your temper, that's a bit of a competitive side. But in golf, you're your own referee. You know you have to call penalties on yourself, etiquette. I always tell people, like, golf teaches you all the life lessons you need to learn. And I think that was the one good thing my parents did, putting me into golf at a young age. You learn to show etiquette. When you lose, you still shake the other person's hand. You tip your hat.
Yeah.
You shake hands on the first tee. You've got to be your own referee. You learn so many important life lessons just playing the sport. So if I have to give anyone any advice, this is basically your whole life in 4 hours, right? The way you conduct yourself, the way you respond to a bad situation or failure in this. If I hit a bad shot, how do I react in the second shot? It's okay to slam the club. I'm first one to say it's okay to get angry, right? Because we all hold ourselves to a higher standard that I should have done better. But once you've done that, it's over. And I think Tiger Woods was a great example of this. Kids thought it's okay to slam your club and throw your club because Tiger Woods does it. He's the best that ever played the game.
Right.
But Tiger was very good at getting over it very quickly. Once that club was thrown, that movement was over. Now it's the next shot. And I think life, golf, everything, it's the next shot in front of you. Live in the moment, live in the present. Don't be stuck in the past, or don't let your mind jump too much into the future. I think that applies to everything. If I'm thinking about, you know what, the 18th hole has water and I'm on the 15th hole, so I better play safe for the next 3 holes till I get to 18 because I don't know, I'm not comfortable. That's letting him, or I made bogey on the last 2 holes, this hole I've got to do something differently. So dwelling on the past or letting your mind race to the future is two very detrimental things, whether in golf or in life. And I think if you look at, when you talk to guys, when you won a major, what were you thinking, right? They all saying, I was focused on that shot.
Yeah, the present moment.
The present moment. Tiger Woods, when he had a 15-shot lead, playing the last hole of Pebble Beach at the US Open, he said, all I kept telling myself was, finish the race, Tiger. Finish the race. Don't let your mind jump ahead to the trophy ceremony, your speech, what are you going to say?
Yeah.
And it's normal, right? You're like already celebrating in your head. He's like, finish the race. So that's more about just focus on the next shot at hand, the next task at hand, whatever that means.
Yeah. Okay, so one last question. What is a quote or a mantra or a phrase that you live by?
So I've had this since I was a 14-year-old kid, and I had it, also a poster of it, when my coach said, my first coach was from Australia, a guy called Kerr Llewellyn. He was a fantastic, one of the best short game coaches in the world. And his quote was, good, better, best. Never let it rest till your good is better and your better is best.
Oh, wow.
So
good.
So you're always striving to get better every single day. So, you're good today, you'll be better tomorrow, but you don't stop till you're the best.
I want the THINC team to hear this, because sometimes I come to work and I say, I'm going to draft better than I've drafted yesterday. And they all look at me like I'm psychotic.
You can never stop trying to be better.
Thank you very much.